So here's some material from a Home Depot in Canada talking about privilege. This was posted by Libs of TikTok, always doing the work. You know, this is like what really just it tells you the state of the media. That I would say that probably the top journalist in the country right now is the anonymous person who runs a Libs of TikTok account on Twitter. This is actual journalism, finding real stories about things that are happening and telling people about it.
So the first thing I want to touch on from this video from Matt Walsh is him claiming that the Libs of TikTok Twitter account is somehow doing real journalism. And that is something that exists that is pervasive among the right. So, you see, right-wingers like to freak out about marginalized people just existing in the world. And the Libs of TikTok Twitter account is a perfect example of right-wingers from all over the place sending in their random petty complaints about marginalized people around them to a profile on Twitter that boosts those stories and the right-wing framing of those stories. The problem is that funnels into a huge pipeline that is basically designed to take the most fringe, ridiculous, out there ideas and some of the most hateful people that are simply expressing their disdain for people in the community around them and funneling them up to the point where they get covered by people like Matt Walsh and eventually Fox News. So they basically have this outrage pipeline that takes personal grievances of privileged individuals and funnels it all the way up to Fox News so they can spend all day covering the culture war. That reality is something that really isn't mimicked on the left. And it is a big problem because it is designed specifically to fuel a sort of vigilantism, one that right-wingers capitalize on in order to not only push their message, but also to take random marginalized people and put them in the spotlight so they end up getting a ton of hate from right-wingers on the internet. It is a way to mobilize their hateful audience to harass specific individuals. This is a fear tactic that the right wing uses to try to keep people from just existing peacefully in their communities. But then there's another part to this, and it's Matt Walsh complaining about privilege and trying to claim that privilege doesn't really exist for cis white folks, but does exist for queer folks and people of color.
And then it goes into, there's two kinds of privilege. Social privilege, that's a special unearned advantage or entitlement used to one's own benefit or to the detriment of others. These groups can be advantaged based on social class, age, disability, ethnic or racial category, gender identity, sexual orientation, and religion. And that definitely exists. There's no question about it. I mean, there are people who have, because of their demographic category, they have social privileges. There are people who have social privileges based on their quote unquote gender identity. In fact, the kinds of people who use phrases like gender identity and think that that's a real thing, those are the ones with social privilege.
Now, this is obviously ridiculous on its face, but we need to understand the reason why Republicans push this message. You see, a lot of Americans live in incredibly homogenous communities. That is actually the whole purpose of the suburbs. They were literally created specifically so that cisgender white folks could flee to the suburbs and live in homogenous communities. That was the entire selling point of suburbia. Well, the people that live in those communities, very often, the only times they'll see somebody that's publicly out as queer or a person of color, they're seeing them on television or in music. And the fact that that is where they are seeing marginalized people leads them to the ridiculous belief that somehow every queer person or every person of color is really a rich celebrity and they have the privilege of being represented in the media. Now, obviously, this is ridiculous for a litany of reasons. First and foremost, queer folks and people of color are actually wildly underrepresented in the media and underrepresented in positions of wealth and power. So there's this lie that's created there that is meant to say that, oh, they're privileged. And then another part of this lie is because there are specific individuals who do have positions of relative power, at least cultural power, who do speak out to support the rights of queer folks or to support the rights of people of color. They take that as evidence that they're privileged because look at all these celebrities that are speaking out in support of them. But think about this for a second. Most queer folks, most people of color, live normal, average, everyday lives. Actually, statistically speaking, live slightly poorer lives than everybody else, financially speaking. And so, queer folks and people of color are subject to an incredible amount of violence, harassment, and discrimination in workplace, housing, and just going about their daily lives. But that is not what is shown on television. What is shown on television is quite literally the most privileged among people of color, the most privileged among queer folk. And so there's these false ideas that are used to propagate these racist, bigoted narratives that people like Matt Walsh put. They are basically banking on people living in very homogenous communities. Now, with gay and lesbian folks, this has lost some of its teeth because, of course, we all know, even in incredibly white communities, big surprise, there's gay folks that live in incredibly white communities. And that is why they are hyper-focusing on trans folks right now, because the reality is there are just less trans folks than there are gay folks. It's also why they continue to focus on people of color, because, once again, we live in an incredibly segregated society, and there's a lot of people that live in homogenous communities that just have no exposure to any person of color in their lives. And even if they do, it's not as a member of their family or one of their close friends. This allows them to prop up this narrative and then create this popular bigotry. And then that bigotry that exists within society, they use to funnel into the vigilantism that goes into things like libs of TikTok. And this is how the cycle repeats itself. They create this hatred that is founded on these ridiculous lies, and then they use that to prop up this vigilantism that props up their news networks that props up the vigilantism. All in an effort to create an incredibly segregated, bigoted society that is willing to mobilize either individualized violence or systematic violence to keep marginalized people oppressed. And this culture of vigilantism has led us to a point where if you look at Texas, where they are trying to get random people to snitch on their neighbors, both for just getting an abortion and for snitching on parents who are supporting their trans children. This is not something that privileged people, by and large, have to deal with. The reality is that these right-wingers are trying to put in place laws that actively discriminate against trans folks, that actively discriminate against people who are trying to get abortions, that actively discriminate against people of color. And they're doing so to such an extreme where they're trying to incentivize random people to snitch on their neighbors, to capitalize off of the same vigilantism that fuels into platforms like libs of TikTok.
Ben Carollo with Rebel Headquarters. You can catch my show Galaxy Brain on the Young Turks Twitch channel every Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. If you want to stay up to date with my content, you can follow me at Benjamin Carollo on Twitter. And lastly, to those of you who might be wondering or have noticed, my pronouns are in fact she, her.